from that class was just the importance of the church, right? And what's the church? We are, right? And so just wanted to just say thanks for coming, for making this a priority, and it's just encouraging to be together on a Sunday morning and to be able to spend time doing this. So it's really important, and thank you guys for that. I'm gonna pray, and then we're gonna jump into Matthew chapter 7 here in a little bit. So let's pray first. Lord, I just want to say thank you again for this time. Thank you for bringing us together. Lord, I thank you for the family that you have given us here. And Lord, for each person that is in this place that you brought here, just pray for each of our hearts. God, you've brought us here for a reason and a purpose. Lord, I just pray that we will hear it and understand it, and Lord, that we will move in it for your honor, for your glory. So would you please just get rid of anything that would get in the way of that in me or in any of us that would keep us from hearing and understanding this. And, I just want your truth to be spoke. So would you please speak during this time? Just give these things, God, to you, and ask them in your name. Amen. The last 6 weeks we've spent time looking at the words of Jesus. Those red words in Matthew chapter 5 is where we started the Sermon on the Mount. And those words that for those people sitting on that hillside as Jesus was teaching and preaching made a lot of people, and I wasn't there, but I think we can probably relate to these words, made them really uncomfortable in a lot of ways. Challenged them as Jesus kind of bucked the system and rearranged and kind of flipped things upside down for these folks. His words, as we've looked at these, go right to the heart, don't they? They can kind of mess you up a little bit when you get into this, and when you really look at what he says, they go to the heart. And this sermon that started in Matthew 5, where we've been, all right, today we're going to finish it up. It's called the Sermon on the Mount. And for these people and for us, I don't know about you, at least for me, it's really been an examination kind of sermon series, self-examination. And I believe that's where these folks were at as Jesus taught these things to them, made them kind of sit back and really take a look at who they are, what they've been doing, how they've been living. And you think about those topics we've hit, right? Whether it's been with anger, looking at the heart of what it causes us anger, how we deal with anger. Some of us really struggle with that. His words are challenging. He ups the game, or he talks about lust in there. He talks about divorce. He talks about worry. He talks about money. All these things that affect our hearts. And he gets right at it. And it can be uncomfortable. It can be challenging. But he wants to get to what's most important, right? And that's to who we are, and even more importantly, whose we are. And that's why we're doing this. And that's really what's most important here is your heart and my heart. And all these areas that Jesus brings up. And listen, Jesus brings them up. So they must be important, right? And you and I both know, I know as we've gone through this, there are things that struggle for my heart. So it's been good. And just like those people on that mountainside who came to listen to him, they had a choice in those moments and listening to what Jesus was saying. They had a choice. Whether they were going to listen and follow and use it and listen to what he was saying and put it to use, or just keep living the way that they were living. And as we sit in this place, in this church building this morning, we are presented with the same choice. Are we going to listen and obey and follow, or are we just going to keep doing life the way we've been doing life? But the choice is given to us as well this morning. And it's a big choice. In Matthew chapter 7, Jesus, again, he said, is finishing up his Sermon on the Mount here. He's going to kind of wind things up. And we're going to take a look at this choice we have. And he kind of sums things up really cool as he presents this in three different ways. But before we do that, I want to kind of just start with a question, and we'll come back to this. But with where we've been, all right, and some of us have been Christians a long time. Some of us have heard sermon after sermon after sermon on some of these same things. A lot of us are in Bible studies. We're in small groups. I want to question, wherever you're at, maybe you're brand new to this and you're just now learning, which is awesome and that's exciting. And I want to ask you a question, at least for the last 6 weeks. All right? What am I doing with it? What am I doing with Jesus? Can you ask yourself that question? What have I been doing with what we've been learning on Sunday mornings? These words of Jesus, the red words. Does that make sense? What am I doing with it? With what he teaches? How is it affecting my life? Has it affected my life? And even in the last 6 weeks. What am I doing? If we could just kind of sit on that just for a moment as we walk through this as well, because here's the thing. A big theme in this last part in what Jesus is saying is obedience. It's one of the main themes. It's huge. But with obedience, I know from my life, even that can be challenging when it comes to following Jesus. Anybody else ever struggle with obeying? There are times where I can get pretty prideful and I want to do it my way. And there are times, I'll just be completely honest with you, I don't think I'm alone here, I'm pretty sure I'm not, where I flat out disobey because I want to. Has anyone been there? Yeah. Obedience is so important, and it can be tough for us as we struggle with the flesh and what we want to do. And here in this section, it talks a lot about it, and it's so important. Not only do we struggle with it that way, we can also get distracted by other things. We've talked a lot about that. Things that are even good. Has anyone ever missed something that God wanted you to do is right in front of your face because you were kind of focused on other things? Has that ever happened to you? It's happened to me. I've overthought something, or I've been distracted by other things, and God had this for me, and I completely missed it. And just didn't obey because I was focused on other things. I found a story that kind of illustrates this point. You guys know who Sherlock Holmes is, right? Right, Sherlock Holmes and Watson. Dr. Watson decided to go on a camping trip together. And so after a good meal, they filled their bellies, getting pretty tired, they decided to go to sleep and fell into a deep sleep. But later on, Holmes woke up and he kind of nudged Watson and he said, "Watson, hey." He says, "Look up at the sky and tell me what you see." So Watson says, "I see millions and millions of stars." What does that tell you? Astronomically, it tells me that there are millions of galaxies and potentially billions of planets. Astrologically, I observe that the Saturn is in Leo. Orologically, I deduce that the time is approximately 3:15. Theologically, I can see that God is all-powerful and that we are small and insignificant. Meteorologically, I can't even say that word. Meteorologically. I suspect that we will have a beautiful day tomorrow. What does it tell you, Holmes? Watson, you idiot. Someone has stolen our tin. Ever been there? Right? It's right in front of you, but you're so focused on everything else, you miss what God has called you to do. I've been there. I've just totally missed it. It happens. And so let's get to the say what part this morning. And we're going to kind of do this differently than what we normally do. We're going to read, and then we're going to kind of walk back through and get some context, which is really important to this. But let's start with the say what. And I'm going to be honest, this one, the last few verses of this has really bothered me in the past. When I got this one just landed on me. I was kind of nervous even about preaching this. Just kind of wishing I got worried, but Dad got that one. But when you study, and this was so awesome, when I got into this and studied the context of it, it's really cool. And it's really good stuff. But as we read this, you may see what we're going here. So in Matthew 7, I'm going to start with verse 15. We're going to read through 23. It says this, as Jesus is still preaching. He says, "Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ferocious wolves. By their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus, by their fruit, you will recognize them. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. Here it comes. Here comes the part where I've read this before. I'm like, oh, okay. Only he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day. Now, what day is he talking about? Judgment. Okay? Remember that. On that day, many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons and perform many miracles? Verse 23, then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. Now, has anyone ever read that and thought, oh man, am I going to be okay? You ever thought that? I have. And I remember reading that and going, oh man, I'm in trouble. Trouble. It's unsettling a little bit when you read that. It kind of bothers you. At least it bothered me. But what's really cool again is when we get into the context of what Jesus has already said and what he's going to say, it makes sense. And he's being very clear here. He's just making a point here. So what I want to do is, now that we've kind of read this, say what, right? Away from me, many are going to say, but I'm going to tell them I don't know you. It's going to, say what? We're going to back up, and I want to go to verse 13, and we're going to start there. And what happens is, it's really awesome. As I studied this, there are three pictures that Jesus gives as he closes up the Sermon on the Mount. All right? So cool. So it's a tale of twos. Three pictures of two, and we're going to look at these. The first one is this, the two gates. Okay, so we're going to read this in context. We're not going to just pull that out and freak out. We're going to go back. So look at verses 13 through 14. Listen to what Jesus says here as he goes in to verse 15. He says, enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only few find it. All right, so he's talking about two gates, two roads. Okay, two roads, two gates. You can slash that, put that together. That leads to that gate, to those gates. Now again, remember Jesus' crowd, right? He's on that mountainside, crowds have gathered. So you have all kinds of people that have come to listen to him talk. So you've got people that are really poor, right on up to the religious leaders who are standing in that crowd listening to this. Now, we know, if you know about the history here, those religious leaders looked really good, didn't they? People looked up to them. They outwardly looked like they had it all together. They knew the law. They knew all about the rules. Very, very religious people following those rules and those laws. But we also know from history here, and Jesus' own words later in Matthew, that they were very hypocritical. Not only were they very religious, and they were hypocritical. And Jesus had a hard time with that group of people, and just gave them a lot of truth that they didn't want to hear. And so we had this mixed crowd all the way up to those kinds of people in this crowd. And this sermon on the Mount, again, is just a self-examination sermon. So as he's saying this, these people can imagine what's going on in their minds and in their hearts, just like for us. So let me ask you this. How many gates are there? 2. Alright? So this invitation here is to enter through which gate?
Narrow.
The narrow gate. Alright? On the narrow road, enter through the narrow gate, the small gate. So what does that gate lead to? Life. Okay, good. You guys are listening. That's awesome. In John chapter 10, we read, Jesus calls himself the gate. Okay? An invitation to follow him, to enter the kingdom. Not just in heaven, but right now, to enter into his kingdom as we walk the narrow road, as we enter through the gate, Jesus, to follow him. Now, in that time, not the most popular thing to say. They were still trying to figure him out, weren't they? Many were still trying to figure out, who is this guy? and not a real popular decision. And it wasn't, even after people still kind of figured it out. It wasn't real popular, and I got to think about that. Not real popular today either. Not the most popular decision to follow Jesus today. Still isn't. It can be tough. It can be hard. That narrow gate is associated with difficulty. That narrow road can be difficult. And Jesus never really hides that fact, does he? In this world, you're going to have many troubles. Take heart, I've overcome the world. That's in John. There's a time where it got so hard, Scripture says that many who were following him deserted him. And they said, this is too hard. His teachings are too hard. And they abandoned him. They left him. This narrow road, this small gate, it can be difficult. It can be tough. One writer says this, Scott McKnight says this about this idea. There is one reason the gate is narrow. He calls it this. It is demanding discipleship. It is demanding discipleship. Jesus says that we must deny ourselves. Right? Pick up our crosses daily and follow him. Anybody find that to be easy peasy? Ooh. Deny myself. Pick up the cross daily and follow him. Man, that's hard. And that's difficult. It's a difficult thing to do, demanding discipleship. Not only that, but his way and these teachings we've even been studying go completely against the culture we live in. They're telling us completely opposite of some of these things. Love your enemies. What? They think that's ridiculous. All these things we've been talking about is not popular opinion at all. And we can see this in our culture. This also requires us, this narrow gate requires us to turn from our sin, not keep living in it. Turn from it. Keep our eyes focused on Jesus. Remember a few weeks ago when we talked about storing up for yourselves treasures in heaven, that divided heart idea, the divided eyes? And to walk that narrow road, to enter through that gate is a single focus on Jesus. That one eye focus, remember? That's what we're talking about. When we look at the wide gate, or the wide road, it's more popular, right? It's easier. It's more popular. Many are going to go through that way. I got to looking at some other translations. ESV says it this way. Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is what? Easy. That leads to destruction. And those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow and the way is what? Hard. That leads to life. And those who find it are few. Now, I think I remember hearing a sermon on this by Francis Chan, and I believe he said this. He says, I believe that the narrow road is a lot more narrower than what we think it is. Jesus says only a few will find it. Only a few will find it. Two gates, slash roads there. One leads to life, one leads to destruction. It's one or the other. There's no middle ground. There's no skirting around it. Jesus is making things very clear to those people and to us. You're on the wide road, folks, all of us, or we're on the narrow road. There's no in between. One leads to life, one leads to death. Pretty clear. So man, if that narrow road is that narrow, how can I even walk on it? Right? I'm not good at it. How do I even walk on it? How do I do that? Is it even possible to walk the narrow road? If it's that narrow and that hard. I love this. I found this too. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a really smart guy, said this about this. This is so good. As long as I recognize this road as the one I am commanded to walk, and try to walk it in fear of myself, it is truly impossible. This is so good. But if I see Jesus Christ walking ahead of me, step by step, if I look only at him and follow him step by step, then I will be protected on this path. Where was his focus? Jesus. Man, I love that. There's so much hope there. It is possible. Jesus makes it possible. Step by step, with him, narrow road. So, this morning, again, we're going to walk back through this. We've got some examinations to do this morning. Am I doing what's easiest on the wide road? Or am I walking the narrow road, headed to the narrow gate? It's difficult. It's tough. Not easy. But it leads to life. The second picture is this. We read it earlier to start with. The two trees. Matthew 7. I'm going to read it again. 15 through 20. Watch out for false prophets. And remember, Jesus continues, all right? He's not taking a break like in my Bible says there's a break. Okay, he's still preaching. So he's continuing. We're getting our context. He talks about the narrow and the wide gates. He goes right into another picture. But he goes into a warning here. Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. By their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus, by their fruit you will recognize them. And not super comfortable words there. He's giving another picture. But remember, he's moving right into a warning here as he moves into this picture. He talks about the narrow and the wide gates. And what's he warn of? False prophets, right? People who are teaching something that's not true. And they look like us. They're among us. They look like us. They may smell like us. They dress like us. But inside, completely different. He calls them ferocious wolves. And think about what he's just talked about with the narrow gates. A great suggestion is he's warning these people, listen, don't listen to them if they're saying there's a way that's easier. They may be saying to you, look, there's an alternative to this narrow road. There's an alternative to these things. There's an easier way to do these things. Beware of false prophets, because they're going to look like you. They may talk like you, but inside they're ferocious wolves. Watch out. And how do you know they're false? How do you know these guys are faking? How do you know that they're these pretenders amongst us? He gives us the answer. What's he say? You'll know them by their fruit. Not just their talk. You're going to know them by what's in their lives and what comes out of their lives, by their fruit. Exactly. Look at verses 16 through 20. Let's read it again. By their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Strong words. Verse 20, here it is again. Thus by their fruit you will recognize them. Doesn't matter what they're saying. How are they living? Right? How are they living? It's pretty clear. So what fruit? Tree bearing fruit. I don't know what ideas come into your mind when we say fruit. Apples, bananas, or obviously it's things that come out of our lives. But we can see here in verse 22, this is interesting. It's not necessarily these big gifts that everybody likes to jump on board with. Did you catch that? It's not necessarily these big gifts. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? In your name did not drive out demons, perform miracles? And I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me. We know what it's not necessarily. That's interesting. Right there. That is really, really interesting. These guys, these false prophets, were doing some pretty incredible things in Jesus' name. But what was the problem? And Jesus states it. They didn't know him, did they? I never knew you. Away from me. I never knew you. So again, what's this fruit? What's this fruit? I'll put it this way. Think about this. In your life, or in my life, do I show mercy? In my life, do I show mercy to others? Am I compassionate? Do I show compassion to others who need it? Do I have a heart for the lost? Do I show compassion to those who are prisoners and don't know it? And they're in their sin? Does it break my heart? And do I reach out to them? Do I offer grace towards other people around me? Galatians 5, the fruit of the Spirit, right? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness. Here's a big one I still need to grow more fruit of. Self-control. Hey, there are those things in your life. You see them growing. And it springs out of that relationship with Jesus because you know Him. Because you know Him. 2 trees. One is fruitful, and one has bad fruit. You know what that word bad means here originally? Worthless. Rotten. Bad fruit. So can we serve and do our own thing and have worthless fruit and look the part? Yep. Yeah, we can. It's worthless outside of Christ. And knowing Him, having that relationship with Him. We can fake it, and some of us are really good at it. There are people that are so good at talking the talk, but no fruit in their life. None. None. That word bad means worthless. Again, real fruit, good fruit, comes from knowing Jesus. Having that relationship with Him. Grows out of that. It's the real deal. Real deal. We know this. Many of us know this. When we encounter Christ, the old is gone, right? The new comes. We become a brand new creation, a brand new person. It's not just a behavior change. It's not. It's a heart change. It comes, if you really have an encounter with Christ, it's the real deal. It changes your heart, not just your behavior. Behavior can be faked. Can it? I'll tell you what, I was really good at it in high school with my parents. And they may know more than what I think they know, but I know that they don't know everything. I was a really good faker for a long time. I'd come to church, I'd go, do the youth things or the youth what, really good at faking. No fruit. Zip, zero fruit. None. On the whiteboard. You know what I mean? We can do that really easily. And not be the real deal. When we have an encounter with Christ, that behavior, yes, it's an outcome, but it comes from a changed heart. And the truth is, we can't fake behavior for a super long time without getting busted. So our hearts aren't changed. Let's talk about heart change. An obedient heart is so key here. Walking the walk, not just talking the talk. It's faith and fruit moving in action. Can't help but go here, just James 1. James talks about this, verses 22 through 25. He says, "Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves." What's he say right after that? You guys awake? Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like a man who looks at his face in a mirror and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. I've wanted to forget. But you know what he's saying. But the man who looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues to do this, not forgetting what he has heard, but what? Doing it. He will be blessed in all that he does. It's listen and obey. It's not just listen, log it in, do nothing. It's an application. It's using it. It's obedience daily in the little things. Not necessarily the big giant gifts and the big things. It's in the little things of life. When you go to work, when you wake up with your kids, or wherever you're at school. It's obedience in the little things. It's bearing fruit in your relationships and in the little things of the day. Fruitfulness in action. What's it look like? I found a story I'm going to share with you. Again, just a great story. And this again comes from Scott McKnight's commentary. Just so good. Such a good illustration and example. He says this. "One of my favorite South Africans is Pastor Trevor Hudson, who serves a church in Benoi near Johannesburg. Trevor, in some ways, is South Africa's Dallas Willard or Richard Foster. He's focusing, as he does, on the inner work of the Spirit in spiritual formation. Trevor's ministry to the homeless and suffering in South Africa is well known. But he tells the story of someone who makes what Jesus wants from us, ordinary acts of love and not just glorified giftedness, come to life. It's the story of a West Indian woman in London who had just been told her husband had been tragically killed in a street accident. And the woman suffered for days. She sank into the corner of her sofa and sat there rigid and unhearing. For a long time, her terrible trance-like look embarrassed her family and friends and officials who came and went. Then the school teacher of one of her children, an English woman, called and seeing how things were, went and sat down beside her. The teacher put an arm around the shoulders of this grieving wife, and this white cheek touched the brown. Then as the unrelenting pain seeped through to her, the newcomer's tears began to flow quietly, falling onto their two hands linked in the woman's lap. For a long time, that was all that was happening. Then at the last, the West Indian woman began to sob. Still not a word was spoken. After a while, the visitor got up and left, leaving a monetary contribution to help the family meet its immediate practical needs. He goes on, he says, Trevor heard this story from John Taylor, who then, with insight, observes how such an experience needs to be interpreted. He writes this: this is the embrace of God, His kiss of life. That is the embrace of His mission and of our intercession. This is what Jesus wants from us. Not our gifts, but our life. Not what brings us honor, but what serves the neighbor. At the judgment, Jesus will not ask about our gifts. He will ask if our cheeks have touched the cheeks of those who suffer. If our hands have held the hands of those who endure pain. And if our gifts are directed at those who most need them. Man, what a picture. Simple. Right? She didn't go in there and give this lady a theological reason for the suffering she was going through. She, without a word, sat next to her, put her cheek against hers, and just hurt with her. Man, that's powerful. That's fruit. That's faith in action. Moving. God wants from us what Christ asks from us. That's what it looks like in our lives. Just one example. Not complicated at all. How cool is that? It gives us a picture of two gates, two trees, and then he finishes things up with two builders. Matthew 7, 24 through 27, he finishes the sermon with this. Very, very simple and clear. He says, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house, yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. Again, Jesus is clearing things up. He's making his point here. He's winding this sermon down. Two builders. One is wise, right? He builds his house on the what? The rock. Okay? The other one is unwise. He's foolish. He builds his house on the what? The sand. The storm comes, and this is interesting. In the context of what Jesus is talking about, the storm is judgment. Remember our context? It's not struggles in life. We usually say that, and it applies. That makes sense. Remember the context. Interesting there. Rock stood firm. Those who put his words into practice stood firm. What happened to the ones that were on the sand? Destroyed. His house crashed. Now, do you see the pattern of what Jesus is saying as he closes this up? Very powerful. This tale of twos. One way leads to life. The other way leads to destruction. There's no middle ground. There is a narrow road and there is a wide road. There is a fruitful tree and there is a bad fruit tree. There is a builder who is wise, who puts his words into practice and uses them. There is a builder who hears his words and does nothing with them. and that leads to destruction. He's 1, 2, 3 punch, making a point here. We have a choice to obey or not, to follow or not. The invitation here is to follow. Obedience. Put my words into practice. It's an invitation to have life in Him and with Him as we follow in obedience. I want to start winding down. So here's a question. With all of this said, and with these closing statements of Jesus, putting these words into practice, and we have asked this question earlier, am I? Am I? Am I using what I'm learning? Or am I just logging it in? Just because. I know a lot about the Bible, but it has not changed my heart at all. I know people like it. Am I using it? Am I showing love, mercy, grace? Am I honoring my neighbor? Am I serving my neighbor? Those fruits that come out. Joy, patience, kindness, gentleness, goodness. Am I putting these things to use in my life? Am I living this out? Maybe some of us this morning is, am I in a relationship with Him? He said, away from me. Why did He say that? He didn't know Him. Does He know you? Do you know Him? Do you know Him? Again, how do you know? This is an examination part. How do I know if I know Him? Well, we have the answer. There's going to be some fruit in my life. As slow as it grows sometimes, right? There's going to be some fruit. We all struggle with it. But God changes us. He's very patient with us as He walks step by step with us and grows us. So with all that Jesus has been teaching, all that we've studied in His Word, am I responding in obedience? Can you answer that question this morning? Even if it's a little step. And one guy at first sure does say, man, I don't. You don't have to get it all at once. He didn't say that. It's step by step. Just in a little thing. Am I growing in my obedience? Am I on the right road? Am I on the narrow road? Or do I just want to do what's easier? Question. What defines you? Where are you living? Is there fruit in my life? Or am I doing a pretty good job right now of faking it? I'm a really good talker. Not a whole lot of fruit. I come to church. And I may do some other things, but other than that, not a lot of fruit. Where are you at there? What tree? What tree are you? Am I putting into practice His words? Am I building my house on the rock or am I on the sand? Am I using this? On Sunday mornings in your small groups, in your Bible studies, is it just there? Or am I taking this home? I'm talking about it, chewing on it, looking at it in my own life, asking these questions. I know there are some families here that do. Praise God, they take it home and they talk about it at their dinner tables. That's awesome. That's what it's about, folks. Not a Sunday morning sermon, and that's it. That's why we do this. We need to move. And am I moving forward? I don't know who said this, but I liked it. It kind of made me laugh. The Bible does not say how beautiful are the seats of those, but the feet of those. How beautiful are the feet of those, right? Take the gospel. Not the seats. There's more to being a follower of Jesus. You're going to hear this over and over again. You've already heard it. Than planting our heinies in a seat for an hour and a half on Sunday mornings. There's more to following Jesus than Sunday morning. It is a life daily as we walk that difficult sometimes now road together following Jesus. There's more. So we don't just meet here to meet on Sunday mornings. We're not just here to meet. We don't study just to study. We study to get life, to use this. He knows what's best for you and I. Sometimes I forget that when I make my own decisions. Anybody else do that? I know it's better, Lord. And I get myself in a mess. Use it to apply, to change us. And this is so huge for us because we're called to something that's so much bigger than ourselves. And so many times I settle for what I wanted And what I have in front of me is that clear thing. It's so much better and so much bigger, and it's eternal. That's what's meant for every single one of us in this room. Bigger than you can imagine, better than you can imagine, more amazing than we could ever imagine. What He has in store for us. Are we following? Are we obeying? Using what He's given us. Jesus gives us an invitation. We've been looking at these things for 6 weeks and we're not done. The question is, what are you going to do with it? What will I do with this? What will I do with what He's given me? Let's end with another quote, last quote. I like this one too. He says, the proper response is to declare who He is by the way we live. Scott. The proper response is to declare who He is by what? The way we live, not just by our mouths, by our lives. Man, that's good. And so what's my life declaring? This morning, as I'm sitting in this room, right now, as we're sitting on that hillside, hearing Jesus say these things. There's 2 ways, that's it. You got a choice. They had to choose. And so do we. And to sit and not make a decision, you've heard this before too, I'm going to sound like my dad. To sit and not choose is to what? Make a choice. To not make a decision is to make a decision. Man, I got sick hearing that. Anybody else get, but it's true. So true. So that's what we present this morning. What is my life declaring? By the way I live. This is examination time. This is heart check time. Not just this morning, but this week. Take it home. Pray over these things and move. Take a next step. Just a small step in obedience. And just watch what God will do, man. It's awesome. It's crazy. But again, we need to help one another in it. I know I need your help. I'm sure we need each other's help as we move forward in all of this. So I'm going to have you guys stand. If there's any decisions that need to be made, if you're outside of Christ this morning, you've never made a decision to follow Him, and do that now. You've got a choice. We don't know if we're going to be here tomorrow. We don't even know if we'll be here this afternoon. We don't. And if there's an area that you need to repent, you need to come back, you need to turn over to Him, do that today. Do that now. Don't wait any longer. You guys, we think we're going to be around forever. We're not. And we're talking eternal things here. Eternal things. Life or death. Forever. What road are you on? I'm going to pray. And let's go live it this week. Can we do that? Live out our faith? Man, let's go throw good fruit at people. In a good way. God, we love you. We thank you. And thank you for your word, Lord. Thank you. I thank you for how clear this one was. And Jesus, that you don't really mince words, which makes us uncomfortable. And sometimes, honestly, we don't even like it. But man, I'm thankful for it because it's truth. Absolutely. And God, I pray that we would understand that. I pray that we would use it. I pray, God, that in our homes and in our schools and our workplaces, God, that our fruit would be good. And people would see it and be drawn to you. Not to us, not to NLCC, but to Jesus. Please help us with that, God, because we get prideful. Help us learn what it is to really obey in all things. To turn things over to you, to trust you in all those areas. God, if there's someone in this room who doesn't know you, who has never made that decision, who hasn't given their life to you, would you just grab a hold of them right now and draw their heart close to you, that they would see the truth of their sin and what it leads to, but of your love that wipes that sin completely away. We praise you for that. Thank you for loving us. Thank you for being patient with us, God, and we praise you. We just pray all these things in your name. Amen. Here to go.